I want to talk about a new technique I'm using to cut out the Carling Loves Cats quilted coat. So this is the original Carling Loves Cats quilted coat. This is what the pattern was based off of. And you can see how I have a quilt as you go seam along the top to connect the front and the back panels. I now have a new cutting technique that I'm using on my quilt coats that gets rid of that seam. So I can show you, this quilted coat is not done yet, but I can show you how that seam doesn't exist anymore. So it's a lot less sewing, it's a lot less binding that you have to create. So let me show you how I'm doing that. But first, let me say that this is only gonna work for quilts that are not directional, meaning, you don't have an up and a down, left and, it can be placed any which way. There's no direction to this quilt. So what I'm gonna do, so you have your front panel and your back panel. And I always think the most important part of the quilt is the back. I always like to have, the best, most important part of the quilt design on the back, and I always like it to be centered. So you can see on the coat, I've centered the design on the back because that's what you're really gonna see. On the front, your collar is really gonna kind of cover up most of the front and your pockets. So you really want the most important part of the quilt, the part that you love, on the back and centered. So I always start with the back panel first, and I use this as my center line. Everybody's always asking me, is this, supposed to be perpendicular up and down, or is it the sleeve? And it is the center of the back, essentially your spine. So this is your back panel. You want to pick your design that you want it, the back centered on, and I have picked this quilted circle right here. I know it's probably hard to see. And I'm gonna just center this right on my design. I'm gonna eyeball it. You can pin the pattern right to your quilt. I like to use these weights. And then I'm just gonna kind of draw my lines right on here, just to kind of show you how I would cut it. Okay, and when I get up here, I'm gonna be a little bit more exact. So here's my center right here. I'm gonna mark it here and here. And I'm gonna mark my neck. Okay, and then when you get to this line, you really wanna mark these corners really carefully. So I'm gonna mark here, and then I'm gonna mark here. Because what you're gonna do with your front panel, if your quilt is not directional, you can do this. You can line it up at the neck to the sleeve right here, and then you can just keep right on cutting. So these are my back panel, front panel lined up. This would typically be where you quilt as you go, a seam, but instead we're just gonna put them together, and then you just keep on cutting this line right here, just straight down. And then you don't have to quilt as you go that seam. Now, what's important to recognize is this line right here is gonna end up being right here. It's going to look like it is straight up and down. So if your quilt is directional, that this won't work, this method won't work, because so this will be straight up and down. But if you cut it on, it's almost on the bias, it might look weird. So that's why it's only for a non-directional quilt. So you're saying, well, I have a directional quilt, what do I do? Well, you just turn your pattern, line it up just like you did this guy, and you just cut it out. and you just quilt as you go that seam, which is really easy to do, and I have a video to show you how to do that. So I hope that helps. And now you are going to cut this. This is the opening of the jacket. So you will cut this line right here. So just flip them over and then cut the other side. So line it up again, right where the center was. And so now you have your quilted coat cut out all in one piece, and you don't have to piece these shoulder seams. So all you're gonna have to piece is this seam right here using Quilt As You Go.